welcome back to another episode of the Bright Brains podcast. Today, my guest is Brandon Anthony, an African American citizen currently living in Kenya. We talk about his travels, his nonprofit, and mental health.
Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Man, thank you so much. So first off, my name is Brandon Anthony. Most people these days know me as Brandon Be Happy. And actually, I'm still a citizen of the U.S. Um, I've been traveling for the past 4 years
Hmm.
to multiple different countries: Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Thailand, Egypt, South Africa, Amsterdam. I think that's them, like just like 11 countries or something in the past like 4 years. And so yeah, I've been here in Kenya for about 5 months. But yeah, this is a place where I am actually in the process of applying for long-term residency. So I'll be here for at least the next 5 years.
That's awesome. So you've been to 11 different countries. How is it that you're able to travel to all these different countries? Is it a part of your job or anything like that? Or
Man, I will tell you a crazy story, man. So actually, all of this started off on Reddit, right?
hmm
I've had a nonprofit for about 5 years, and we were looking for ways to sort of just expand, right? And we had already been doing this one project that was community refrigerators, right? Which is just free food. And instead of being at a food bank, we have a nice refrigerator that we partnered up with local restaurants in North Carolina. But we are looking to get bigger, right? And
hmm
so at the time, Reddit had this thing called RPAN, right? Which was public access network. And it was sort of like Instagram Live. But if you were on this, it didn't matter how many followers you had, you could literally make it to the front page of Reddit, right? And this is during the beginning of the pandemic. Um, at the time, what had happened was I had actually just been fired from a job, right? Um, I was just homeless a year before at this time, right?
Oh,
I was,
wow.
yeah, so I was homeless for about a year, right? After a severe like alcohol use disorder. I just got this job and moved to New Orleans. I brought my girlfriend with me. I told everybody, don't worry, I'm not going to start drinking again, even though I'm in New Orleans, because I have this job, I have this girl, I have this nonprofit, right? My
hmm
first day in New Orleans, I lose the job, right?
Oh, wow. That's
Right.
wild, man. Yeah.
The apartment that I was living in was connected to the job I had, right?
Oh,
So
man.
then, the person was like, "Hey, man, I heard you lost your job. If you don't have something on the books by next month, I'm gonna need you out, right? This just seems like it's a little bit too much of a headache, right?" And then the
Yeah.
girl that I brought with me, she only came, right, because I told her I could pay for everything because I have a job. So she went right back to Atlanta, right? So literally in the midst of 3 days of moving to New Orleans, I lost all the foundations I thought I had. And so I literally at the time, all I had was a bicycle. And I would be riding this bicycle day after day because I was just trying to find jobs mowing lawns, right? Or some
hmm
type of yard work. That's what I come from, right? Like
Yeah.
construction, yard work, stuff like this. But during that time, like I was finding like a little bit of excitement. And I was like, man, this is sort of a beautiful thing. And then one day, like things were just feeling a little bit rough, and I decided I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try this RPAN. Um, and one, like I don't want to drink, and two, I think that this is just for some reason I was like, I think this is something people need to just be aware of, right?
hmm
So I turned on RPAN, and the first episode was actually called "Biking with a Black Dude," right? Yeah, biking with a black dude. I don't want to relapse for this hour. Ask me anything. Right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Um, and that first episode, 10,000 people showed up. All
Oh,
right.
wow.
And they were asking all these questions, that to me seems so regular, right? Like, okay, so when you were homeless, how did you find food? How did you do this? So I was just telling the stories because, I mean, this was just my intelligence, right?
hmm
And people on Reddit were just like, man, this is incredible, man. Like, I had no clue this is how you had to get around. And I'm like, yeah, this is just real life, you know? And then eventually, by the end of the hour, lots of people were like, man, if you came back tomorrow and did this, like I'd show up again, right? So I'm like, all
Mm-hmm.
right, bet. I literally don't have a job. I'll be here tomorrow. So show up tomorrow, about 12,000 people show up. Show up the next day, boom, 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 boom. Next thing you know, by like 10 days into this, I'm having like, let's say 25,000 people a day tune in, right? And
That's
I'm not
amazing.
making any money, right? Yeah, it's incredible, right? I'm not making any money, but I recognize it's amazing. And so I start trying to plan, right? At the time, I had like $600 in my bank account to my name, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, all right, I need about 90 days to be able to figure out what this platform could be, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
start asking on Reddit, right? I start being like, all right, y'all, do y'all know any place I could go where I could get 3 months of rent for 500, right? And then I'd have like $100 to eat, right?
Yeah.
And I said the main thing though is it's got to be a place that's cool with black folks, right? I'm from majority black cities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So someone tells me Oaxaca, Mexico, right? And they say,
Mm-hmm.
man, actually in Oaxaca, right, in the center of our city, we prayed to a black dude who looked like you. And at the time, I had a big old afro, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, what
They
you talking
pray.
about? And they're,
You said they prayed
yeah,
to a
they're
black
like,
dude?
yep. And they're like, yo, so the head of our church, and I went and saw this reality is Saint Martin, right?
Yeah.
And Saint Martin is like the saint of connection, and it is a black man with an afro, right? And in
Huh.
Oaxaca, Mexico, a lot of people there, actually, I'd say, I'm not going to say the majority, but a large part of this population are considered Afro descendants. And not just considered,
Mm-hmm.
they identify as Afro descendants. So
Mm-hmm.
when you go there, they literally see you and they're like, "Oh, snap! You look like my uncle. You look like my grandfather." Because slavery didn't just happen in Northern America, right? There were also
Yeah.
huge ports in Mexico and South America, right? So I had never really paid attention to the diaspora of slavery that also hit Mexico. And I come to find out Oaxaca, Mexico is genuinely like a black as it's like New Orleans, but they speak Spanish instead of French. And so yeah, I go
That's
there,
wild.
give myself a little bit of time. Some other crazier things even happen while I'm there. But genuinely, by doubling down, next thing you know, we're having 100,000 plus people a day tune in. I think our biggest episode was like over 300,000 people.
Oh wow.
And by the end, yeah, we had affected about 12 million people. And while everyone was trying to get me to focus on doing YouTube, I recognized I was like, no, this is bigger than YouTube, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're doing group therapy, and this is on some days this is the biggest group in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like focused on their positivity. So against everybody's wishes, because everyone, we're getting thousands of comments a day. Go on YouTube. This is YouTube. And I'm like, nah, guys, don't worry. I'm gonna figure this out. And actually, what we ended up doing is we took a beautiful proposal of all of our numbers, of all of our comments, and we started pitching it around to therapy companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Saying that like, yo, we actually have the largest group therapy in the world, and we just need somebody to give us a shot. And we actually did. We found somebody, or we found an organization who helps me get a couple more certifications just so that I'm like certified to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
now I host group therapy for a couple different companies all over the world
That's awesome. So, had you done like group therapy before this whole thing? So this was something you just got into. That's pretty cool, man. And you don't have to like go to college or anything like that to do
now.
like therapy.
Man, what's so beautiful is and this is actually one thing that I try and iterate quite a bit is that each of us within our own life experience has a certain amount of wisdom and knowledge that they're able to pick up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, although there's this incredible wealth of information from Western ideology and Western therapy, right? There's also so many other versions, right, of healing, of patience, of growth, right, that come from completely different versions of the world, right? So generally,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on Section 8. You know what I'm saying? Literally, my family were the last slaves in America. My grandmother was an actual slave, ran off of the cotton field at 19 years old in South Carolina, right?
Oh
So,
wow.
I mean, there are things that we also learned innately, right? And
Mm-hmm.
genuinely by being able to show, right? And I mean, we had the numbers to back this. That look, man, we have 12 million people who've tuned into this. We have thousands upon thousands of comments of the healing that has taken place, under my version of wisdom, which is, something that's been passed down for generations upon generations in our community and our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And, luckily enough, just because of the leverage that we had, we were able to, find someone who was like, hey, if you do this and this, you are technically certified to be able to do this. And yeah, that is my truth.
That's awesome, man. So this group therapy, is it like black centered, or is it just like open to everybody?
Man, honestly, so I have about two different groups that I work with. One group is, some of the top one percenters in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm obviously not going to name drop, but I mean, just some of the biggest companies that you could ever even imagine. Some of their VPs, some of their CFOs, are people that, have been some of my students, as well as I have another that is a little bit closer to like middle America.
Mm-hmm.
So more like, the salt of, good old America.
Yeah,
But honestly, the people I teach look nothing like me and have had backgrounds that are almost polar opposite. And
yeah.
now I'm trying to expand back into our community.
That's awesome, man. So how do you do this group therapy over Zoom, or is it like on any other kind of space?
Yeah, so we do it online on Zoom, and it's so beautiful is after being able to do this now for about 3 years, and now we also provide it, in real life, right? So
Yeah.
we are doing free group therapy in Turkey, um, and we're even doing a version of it here, right, in Nairobi, Kenya. So now it's actually something that is one of the free services that our nonprofit provides.
Hmm.
After now having a lot of yeah, just a lot of history in this.
That's awesome. So what does a typical group therapy session? Hold up. Sorry about that. I had a call. Let me put myself on do not disturb. But so what does a typical group therapy session look like? Like, how long does it last? Like, what kind of things you talk about? I've never done group therapy,
Yeah,
so
no,
yeah.
it's a great question. And genuinely, the best thing about this, right, is that the people or the students in that class of group therapy, they are the actual magicians. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's whatever the group, right, is looking to recognize or connect with. All right. Don't get me wrong. Like, so first off, we have about an hour time. And, within the classes that I have now, because I've been teaching them for a couple of years, we're just talking about constantly growth, obstacles, and opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I normally check in. I'll say what I'm learning in that moment. I have a plethora of teachers, that I found through travels, through online, everything. But then from there, I really allow, my students to create the magic to say like, all right, this is what I'm experiencing. And, these are some of the things that we just try and find the softer space in.
That's awesome. Have you noticed like a difference between like different cultures? Like say a difference between people in Mexico and America and Kenya when you do these group therapy sessions? Like, are some people more open than others, or are we all just dealing with the same problems?
Man, I think that is such a wonderful question. And, no one's ever asked me that before, but, I have had the ability to just observe, right?
Mm,
So, one thing I think even towards the latter of what you just said there, it's a little bit more consistent, right? Is that we find that there's much more overlap, right, in
mm,
everything that we're experiencing. Because when we're talking about therapy, right, what we're talking about is our response to our emotions, right?
mm,
And most times it's our opinion about our emotions. So when we talk about these emotions, love, grief, anxiety, um, alienation, right, loneliness, things like this, right? That that's overlapping across all cultures, right? What's the difference is maybe the version of the experience, right? So maybe, grief looks like one way in Turkey, because I mean, we're doing therapy in Turkey after the Turkish earthquake, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
they just lost 20,000 people there. So I
Yeah.
mean,
That's
that grief
wild.
looks different than the grief that we were doing when we were actually doing therapy classes in South Africa, right? South Africa
Hmm.
is actually much more about alcoholism. They're just literally they're still reeling off of the end of something called the DORP system, right? Which was a
Yeah.
barter system where people were paid in alcohol instead of actual dollars, right?
Huh.
So, their indigenous community has been paid in alcohol for the last century, right? But,
That's wild.
we're still talking about grief when it comes to losing people, right? It's just where it is on the spectrum of experience. And one thing that you notice is, a lot of even the opinion from it comes from the people in Turkey feel as if their grief is more significant than the people in Kenya, right? And the people in Kenya think
Hmm.
their grief is more significant than the people in America. But genuinely, when you take this step back and you're actually hearing everybody explain and explore, right, what these emotions feel like, you recognize that there is really no difference, right? That the experience might change, right, but the emotion is still the exact same. And so, yeah, I think you find that it's a lot of overlap just with its own sort of peaks of experience here and there.
It's pretty cool, man. And that can be I'm pretty sure it's a pretty eye-opening experience, like meeting all these people from different cultures. What I know you talk about what you talk to the people about, but like what have you learned from all this of meeting different people and how has it affected you?
Man, so what's been the greatest gift that I've had in being able to be a servant to these spaces is
Mm.
that for the first like 2 years of doing this, I was sort of as I was saying before, I was working solely in this community that really if we're not calling it the top 1%, there was actually another article came out that it said it's there's not just a 1% but a 9%, right? Which is also really wealthy, right? But just not the Jeff Bezos, right? So let's say I was
Hmm.
working with the 9%ers, right? And there was a time in my life growing up, right? Because I come from different different hoods. I'll just say I come
Yeah.
from different hoods
Yeah.
all over America, right? And I
Hmm.
got my last hood tattooed on my chest, right?
Hmm.
So there was a time in my life where I was chasing, right, the life that my clients today have, right?
Yeah.
And even as I was, just finishing this whole experience of being homeless, right? And I was first, just trying to get this money, trying to do this hustle, right? I'm chasing money in my mind, right? All right, I'm trying to get 1 million, I'm trying to get 2 million. And then I start working with these people who have hundreds of millions,
Oh wow.
and they are not any happier. Actually, I will tell you for a fact, they are less happy than everybody I knew in all of the hoods I grew up in.
Wow.
And I
That's
mean,
wow. That's eye-opening.
it and it's such a deep level of unhappiness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's someone at 50 years old who's felt like they've never actually had a real friend, right?
Oh
Felt as if
wow.
they've had to pay every single person who's ever been around them, right? Who when they talk about their friends, they're just talking about a list of coworkers or employees, right?
Yeah.
And we're talking about this significant amount of loneliness that comes from this light. And I was able to like start grasping really early on that like, okay, within this, there's the more we chase this currency, the more we start to have to let go of this community, right?
Hmm.
Because this currency is an individual right? It's an individual ambition, right? And just as I was just became more and more aware of this, is like, okay, so every time I tell myself I want to, for every private plane trip I want to take in my head, I'm probably going to have to lose 10 to 15 people in my circle, right? I started actually start thinking like, all right, I'm going to make sure that this money is never fueling me.
Yeah.
And genuinely, I think that became the reason why our nonprofit became or is so impactful, even while it has such a low overhead. right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, we don't bring in the big donations. Because I mean, I don't look like a nonprofit owner to people who donate money, middle America
Hmm.
or regular America white people. I don't look like a nonprofit owner. So I mean, we go through all of the. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Side eyes, double looks, you know, everything.
Yeah, I know.
But
I live in
recognizing because
Yeah,
yeah.
I ain't know if I told you, but yeah, I live in Ohio. So yeah, I'm in Middle
Oh,
America. Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, you
So
know exactly how it is, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, so having that space of just like being able to like learn that okay, this money's not going to fuel me because it doesn't fuel any of the happiness that I seek. I think that is what started making our nonprofit so impactful because when the money comes in, we are so happy to give it away.
Yeah.
I
That's
do not
awesome.
want to be trapped by this shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just want to utilize it as a tool it can be, right? So yeah, that's been like probably my biggest learning lesson. I think thus far, maybe, right? Or at least in this
So
moment.
let's talk about the nonprofit. What's it called and what is it that you do?
Man, so it's called Santana's Foundation. It's named after
Hmm.
my little sister. Her name is Santana, and
Hmm.
genuinely, it's a family-run nonprofit. And the reason it runs is because you know this is from the side of my family where we're all the last slaves in America. So, you
Hmm.
know, my grandmother, she got off of a cotton field in South Carolina at 19 to be introduced to the crack epidemic, right? At like 35.
Damn.
And so, you know, recognizing the household I grew up in, you know, there, you know, literacy wasn't really a big thing. It was just, it was a different transition that we were experiencing in most of America. And so with that, you know, all of her children are not actually, yeah, you know, yeah, you know, I'm not trying to put everybody's business out there, but we all experience some version of addiction and alcoholism. But genuinely, we are lucky enough. You know, about 8 years ago, we lost one of our patriarchs of the family, and that started like this huge mindset shift, right?
Hmm.
Of okay, if Curvis is no longer with us, but we're all doing the exact same thing that Curvis is doing, right? That's you know my
Hmm.
uncle's name, right? That you know unless we make a change, we're going next. And so it started off with you know a couple members of the family making changes. I was the last one to make the change about almost 5 years ago at this point. And then you know we grouped together. And we were like, look, we actually wanted to be sort of a consultancy at first, right? See if we could help some of these NGOs who are doing different, you know, programs that we thought could have just been done more efficiently. And of course, you know, people don't always want to listen to, you know, the people at the bottom if you don't have, you know, the Harvard
Yeah.
degrees. And so, yeah, you know, they weren't listening. So we decided that, you know, we could put, you know, a couple dollars together, each of us, and, you know, form our own nonprofit. So, you know, it's a family run. You know, it's my cousin, it's my sister, it's now my dad, it's my aunt. And really all we're trying to do is like make the world a little bit better, you know, one day at a time. And we just find all the ways to be servants of, you know, different places around the world to do it.
So what is it exactly that you could do? I think you mentioned before I started recording about like community refrigerators. So if you could just
Yeah.
talk about how it works and things like
Yeah,
that.
so one of the things we do is community kitchens, right? Community
Hmm.
refrigerators, community kitchens. And one of the reasons that we even do that is, you know, we believe that it's sort of a Maslow's hierarchy, right? That
Hmm.
once people can get to a baseline, right, of having food, shelter, and like sort of just these basic necessities taken care of, then it allows people the freedom to really start thinking of what they want to become, right? So, yeah,
Hmm.
one of the first things that we do in neighborhoods is just provide free food. So we have community refrigerators back in America. We do community kitchens in South Africa, Turkey, obviously Nairobi now. And you know, outside of just providing them with food, after that we try and start working right with the community to see in which ways they would like to grow.
That's awesome, man. That sounds pretty cool. So, in Nairobi, I don't know if I pronounced that right, Nairobi, Kenya. What are some issues that young people are facing, and how is your nonprofit meeting their needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we're lucky enough to where we actually get invited places, right? So
Mm.
we don't go to a random city and say, "Hey, looks like some change is supposed to be made." Like for us, that feels like white savior mentality, right? What we
Yeah.
do is like we feel as if our work is done good enough. Genuinely, some other people around the world might be looking for that. So we are reached out to by a couple of community leads in the second largest slum in Nairobi. It's called Mathare, right?
Hmm.
And their big issue is food insecurity, right? Food, job insecurity, education insecurity, right? But starting off with food. So they had seen what we had been doing, all over, and they asked us to come in and start off by implementing a kitchen, right? So that's what we do. We have a kitchen. Literally today, we just fed about 200 of the youth, right? And they're all sort of attached to these wonderful football teams or soccer, as we would say in
Yeah.
America.
I was about to
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
like, I was about to
Yeah,
say,
no,
what kind
no,
of football?
yeah, no, no. So definitely, yeah. So African football or European football,
It's-
soccer,
yeah.
and so yeah, we take care of those kids because yeah, one of their main things right now that's and I mean these are some of the issues just coming from colonization. All these different parts of Africa were colonized without their acceptance. Right, they're getting
Hmm.
completely um, exploited, right, for resources, and it leaves this trail, right, that is a feature of capitalism that these people who normally would have all the fruits and vegetables and trees that they need, now they just can't really find a way to ingratiate into this new capitalistic society because their version of life was so vastly different from this, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, we're coming in first. We're feeding everybody, and then our next step is we're going to be providing some like literature classes, right, to see if that can help sort of expand the imagination. See, because I mean sometimes you even have to help a community learn a dream, right? In
Yeah.
2023, right? What does it mean to have a modern dream, right? Quote unquote modern dream, right? But just for the
Yeah.
society you're in. And so yeah, that's sort of what we're working on next is we're doing these reading programs. We've teamed up with a couple of tech companies. We're actually coming out on an app just next Monday. And so yeah, we're just trying to see the ways that we can help this garden of a community blossom.
What are some aspirations that you have for the future of this nonprofit? Like, where would you want to see this nonprofit develop into within, say, 10, 20 years or so?
Hopefully it develops into 1,000, if not 10,000 more nonprofits just like it. All right.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things I heard early on is those closest to the problem are normally closest to the solution. All right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we work on here is like I know a lot of nonprofits try and create like this specific. Yeah, we get the needles from hornets and then we sew them with indigenous people to make this and this, and it makes it
Yeah.
this crazy concept that like the regular person is like, you do what, right? And it's like, man, like, and it makes it to where there's a gap, right? There's a gap in society. People are like, oh, nonprofit or people who do nonprofits are like real smart, rich, privileged kids or things like this who are thinking all that. But like a nonprofit is what we do in our community every single day. A nonprofit is the
Hmm.
person on your corner that you can go knock on their door and say, hey, do you have some sugar? Right? And they're like, yeah, I got you on that. You know what I'm saying? And like,
Hmm.
that's literally our version of the nonprofit, right? Like, we're constantly just trying to make sure we have sugar so that if anybody knocks, like, yeah, I got a little bit for you, right?
Yeah.
And helping people recognize that, like, this changing the world is not as big as we think it is, right? It's really one step, one person at a time, right? And so allowing ourselves to recognize, like, yeah, this week we're doing community kitchens. But if next week people are asking us to build kitchens, right? Because actually we're doing that now. Like, we've been asked to build kitchens. Like, yeah, we can do that too, right? Because like this is just a human experience, and I believe I can help. And I think everybody in this world can help as long as you just give yourself that credence. Like, yeah, my mind is capable and my heart is here, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, man, we are the neighborhood nonprofit, genuine, right?
That's awesome. So let me ask you this. Earlier, you mentioned that your you applied for long-term residency in Kenya. So what is it about Kenya that spoke to you and said, I want to live here uh, permanently, or at least semi-permanently? Is that what you want, to live there for the rest of
Yeah.
your life, or yeah?
So yeah, I'm thinking permanently. I'm bringing my mom out next month for us to start looking at properties that she can start looking at retiring.
Yeah,
Right, because right now that's not even an option for anybody in my family. My grandmother just beat cancer for the second time and is still working.
that's wild.
So we are really looking to find some other options. As far as being able to retire. And really, what made it so great for me, or what makes Kenya so amazing for me, is recognizing that capitalism actually only made its way here a little bit less than 100 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Great Scramble for Africa, which I think is like 1884 is when the conversation happens, right? Obviously, without Africa's knowledge, right? And the actual colonization, the year that the British come into um, Kenya is actually like 1913, 1915, right? So we're at like
Mm-hmm.
110 years of capitalism, right?
Yeah.
But what makes that really beautiful is, obviously this had to be issued or conditioned in stages, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is although, right, this is, one of the most financially stable, right, just when it comes to, GDP and things like that, Kenya is a really stable country in Africa, right? You're still dealing with a community where a lot of their elders remember a time before the dollar, right?
Oh wow.
You still deal with villages today, right? That will allow you to trade. You don't have to pay for school in some villages if you have enough goats, right? If you
Huh.
have enough chickens. There's literally a village here that we're going to be working with in a very short amount of time because the founder of Kenyan Readathon, this is actually the village that she's from, where I mean they have a school that they're running out there, and people pay them in animals, right?
Hmm.
And so like this type of community, right, and this type of intelligence, it still seeps its way into the regular ecosystem of Nairobi, right? And so
Hmm.
when you're looking at places where you're interested in, this capacity for change, right? This capacity, for being able to lift people out of poverty, of giving people sovereignty, right? It like because I've been doing this now for about 4 years. You start recognizing there are certain things that make for a better ecosystem for this to be possible, right? Like people have to have a common goal, right? People have to have a certain amount of connection and trust, right? Um, People have to have a certain amount of talent and capacity, right? And so, when you're in Nairobi and you're recognizing, wow, a ton of these kids are college graduated, right? If you want to utilize that as one marker, right? Yet a lot of these kids who are college grads, their grandparents or their parents come from a system before the dollar, right? So like
Hmm.
they understand what it means to barter, right? Or what it means to, you wash my hand, I wash yours, right? Or one hand washes the other. And so it really creates this incredible space, man, where I'm telling you, you're out here and man, I think the only word I could describe it for is it's gumbo out here. You know, like there's so many different things happening, but because of the base, right, it allows
Hmm.
everyone to move in this incredible stew and this real flavorful life. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm ready to be the ambassador for Nairobi. It is. All of us should be, especially people of color, man. We should be checking back in, coming back to the motherland, right?
You think more African Americans should move to Kenya or Africa in general?
Man, I think we all should. I think we
Yeah.
all should. I am definitely Pan African, um, and it's not because I'm anti-white. It's I think I'm just a realist of capitalism, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things I'm trying to constantly iterate to people here is like when America started marketing capitalism, the biggest trick that they ever pulled over everybody is that they had a free workforce, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're sending out all this, oh, capitalism's the way to become a millionaire overnight. But the only way
Hmm.
they're doing this is because they have slaves, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And so
Slaves and
they have
stolen
to
land. I don't
slaves and
think.
stolen land, right?
Yep. Yeah.
These are the axis of power, right?
Hmm.
For how America did this, right? These are their two main things. And so recognizing even as time starts shifting, capitalism is a Ponzi scheme, right? You have to have people
Hmm.
buying into it at all times for it to keep growing, right?
Exactly.
So even as they're recognizing, right, that we're going to abolish slavery, right, they can't change what capitalism means,
Yeah.
right? So what does this mean? They have to keep implementing a free workforce, right?
Exactly.
Which is the reason why the next thing, after slavery, we went to sharecropping. After sharecropping, we went to privatized prisons, right?
Hmm.
Because no matter what, America and capitalism in America has to run on an absolutely exploited labor force, not just
Yeah.
a lower one, right? But an absolute exploited, right? Where like
Yeah.
literally 0 cents on the dollar, right? Um,
Exactly.
and, and when you start looking at that, from a broader view, and especially from the neighborhoods I come from, I was just looking at this and I was like, I don't have to be mad at anybody. I can just observe that yes, there is a chance for me to win, but America can't allow me to win and my whole family to win. Or if my
Yeah.
whole family wins, they can't allow my whole block to win. And if my whole block
Exactly.
wins, they can't allow my whole. Eventually, it has to stop somewhere, or else capitalism fucking upends itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so when you're able to look at it, I think through a, an empathetic standpoint, right? And being like, yo, like I understand what it is. I know maybe some of y'all want to make the changes, but look, bro, it is what it is, and I'm not gonna live my life to be somebody else's free workforce, right?
Exactly.
Um, and so, genuinely, I think all African Americans should really take the space to see what it's like, especially in places that are asking for you to come home. And I'm telling you, once we start making this leap and recognizing, oh, they give us this media just so that we don't leave, right? The Africa
Yeah.
that we know is nothing like the Africa that exists. They
Exactly.
have to
Yeah.
feed us a certain thing so that we will never take the leap. Man, when I came to Nairobi and found out, man, they have something. It's called M-Pesa, right? It's
Hmm.
like Cash App slash Venmo, but it's way fucking better, way more efficient, right? You could pay your landlord, you could pay your drug dealer in this. Literally, the whole thing is on this, right? They've had this
Yeah.
out for like 20 years, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm marveling over the technology, how much better it is than Venmo today. They're like, bro,
Yeah.
we've had this for 20 years. Like, what are you talking about? Why are you? I'm like, man, I thought 20 years ago y'all was still on giraffes. That's what they would say,
Yeah.
And so
Exactly. Yeah.
recognizing it's like it's a conscious manipulation. And yes, I invite us, man. As soon as I came out here, man, I mean, it's a no brainer. It is a no brainer. All right.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. So, it's been about 30 minutes. I guess I would just ask, let's see here. Where can they find you? I know your Instagram is Brandon Be Good, but if people want to
Brandon, be
learn,
happy.
Brandon Be Happy, that's right. If people want to learn more about your nonprofit, is there like a website they can go to or
Yeah, of course. You can check
yeah?
out Santanasfoundation.org. All right.
Hmm.
Or you can also just check us out on Instagram at Santana's Fund. All right. But yeah, just come check us out. We're doing a lot of incredible things.
Awesome, awesome, man. Hey, this was a really good talk, man. I learned a lot. This is very inspirational. Um, I know you mentioned about you said your grandmother was one of the last slaves, and and then you said she ran into the crack epidemic. So you said she was like a slave, like in the 70s and 80s, or I'm
In the
trying to
60s.
in the 60s? Yeah.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
know, yeah,
And then like 20 years later, and it's like, let's say 25 years later, right? DC's introduced the crack early, like mid 80s,
yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I mean, literally maybe 20 years between her being off of, not even just being off of plantation. My grandmother didn't know what Thanksgiving was until she was 20
Wow.
years old and
That's
picked
wild,
the
man.
tobacco, the corn for it every single year of her life. So, I mean, we're talking about a whole different world my grandmother was coming from into DC. And so, yeah, for the crack epidemic to be starting, in the early 80s. I mean, yeah, she might have had like 20 years of trying to figure out what the world she was in today before that came, and she was still, yeah, rightfully just completely unprepared to
Yeah.
understand how that could affect the household.
Wow. I can only imagine. That's a story right there, man. You know,
Oh yeah,
that's a story. Yeah. Um, so basically what's the final word, man? What do you wanna impart on people before yeah.
yeah. I think one thing I would impart is don't get too attached to who you are today. All right, because
Yeah.
there's always room for another you that can show up tomorrow.
That's beautiful.
All
That's
right.
beautiful, man. I love it. Hey, thank you for your time. And
Thank you,
you
man.
take it easy, man. Hey, no
All
problem.
right,
Let
have a
me
good one.
hey, you was the only